Human Operative fixed her failing wings. Now, alien Asset follows him everywhere. The storm outside the citadel was relentless, a shrieking tempest that battered the midnight black walls and lashed the barren plains with icy needles of rain. Inside, the corridors shone with a cold, artificial gleam. Obsidian floors, seamless panels laced with glowing glyphs, all a monument to the arrogance of the Sarn warlord. Callum, his matte armor blending with the shadows, moved with practiced stealth. The flickering light from passing patrols danced across his visor, illuminating the determined line of his jaw. His assignment seemed straightforward. Extract the subject called Nira and vanish. But nothing in Callum's line of work was ever as simple as it looked. He slipped past the final security field, feeling the hair on his arms rise at the static charge. The field fizzed, barely an inch from his face, and for a moment he tasted ozone. He pressed himself against the chill of a circular hatch and steadied his breathing. From within, the sound of machinery, the sharp hiss of pain, metal on metal clatter, and the muffled voices of alien technicians. Through the narrow viewport, harsh white light spilled into the gloom. He risked a glance. The laboratory was blindingly sterile, every surface white and cold, the brightness erasing all shadows. In the center, bound to a steel platform, lay his target, Lyra. Not just a weapon, but a vision. Deep cobalt blue skin that shimmered beneath the lights, snow-white hair cascading in a wild spill to her waist, silver eyes burning with defiance and something else, an unbroken spirit. She was tall and slender, her form tense against the restraints, dressed in a crisp white blouse and a fitted black skirt, so out of place amidst the humming machinery and sterile instruments. Around her, alien technicians in featureless silver suits moved with mechanical precision, their hands busy at the interface of flesh and circuitry on her exposed back. The lead scientist, a brute with blocky features and rough hands, yanked a cable free, drawing a strangled gasp from Lyra. Callum's jaw tightened. He could see the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her lips pressed into a thin, unwavering line. Their gazes locked through the glass. No plea, only a fierce, unyielding challenge that seemed to demand, "Who are you to watch?" Callum's grip tightened on his silenced pistol. A plan formed in his mind, sharp and cold as the air he breathed. He counted the technicians, 3, 2 aides, and the lead. No alarms yet. He exhaled, steady. In one swift motion, he released the hatch seal and slipped inside. The first shot was a whisper. The lead scientist crumpled, surprise etched on his face as he hit the floor. The aides barely had time to react. The second shot caught one in the throat, dropping him silently. The third, a quick pivot, landed in the leg of the last aide, who dropped with a yelp. Callum was on him instantly, hand pressed over the alien's mouth, pistol at the base of his skull. "Quiet," he growled. The aide's eyes went wide, then rolled back as Callum delivered a swift, ruthless blow to the temple. Silence returned, broken only by Lyra's ragged breaths and the low, persistent drone of machines. Callum approached, weapon still raised, every sense alive. Lyra tensed, muscles taut as steel cables, eyes narrowed with suspicion and pain. He noted the damage, wires torn and trailing from her back, clear fluid mingling with blood, scorched synthetic tissue exposing raw circuitry. "This will hurt," Callum warned, voice steady but not unkind. He set his pistol aside and opened his toolkit. She flinched, eyes flickering with distrust. He worked quickly, hands precise and gentle, peeling back burnt connectors and realigning filaments. Her body arched in pain, but she made no sound, her jaw clenched in silent endurance. Callum caught the flicker of confusion in her eyes as his touch lingered. No cruelty, only purpose. She watched him closely, curiosity overtaking suspicion. "You're not one of them," she breathed, more statement than question. "No," he replied, not looking up. "I'm here to get you out." He reconnected the final wire. The last connection sparked violet, a bright flash that ran down her spine. Lyra's body trembled, light pulsing beneath her skin, veins tracing luminous lines. She gripped the edge of the table, breath coming fast. "Crude, but effective," he muttered, sealing the wound. He reached for her restraints, undoing the magnetic locks. Alarms screamed suddenly, red strobes slicing through the sterile white. Time was up. Lyra slid from the table in one fluid motion, crouched and wary, white hair falling in a curtain over one shoulder. Her eyes never left Callum, silver and sharp. He braced for an attack, her hands flexed, ready. Instead, she hesitated, head tilted, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "Can you move?" Callum asked, voice pitched low. "If you lead," she replied, melodic and strange, tinged with confusion. The doors crashed open, a squad of Sarn guards flooding into the room, weapons drawn. Callum fired, 3 clean shots. Lyra moved like a streak of blue lightning, vaulting from the shadows, her limbs a blur of efficiency. She dispatched the first guard with a spinning kick, the second with a sharp twist of the wrist that sent his weapon clattering. Callum covered her, picking targets with clinical precision as Lyra struck, silent and graceful as a predator. Together, they moved, a wordless, perfect rhythm. Callum's armor absorbed a glancing blow. Lyra's hands glowed with residual energy, leaving burn marks on her attackers. In moments, the last guard hit the floor. The lab plunged into chaos. They plunged into the underbelly of the citadel, alarms echoing behind them, the maze of pipes and machinery swallowing their forms. In the maintenance sector, Callum pressed against a steel pillar, fingers flying over the controls at his wrist. His armor shimmered, then vanished, the cloaking field bending light around him. Lyra watched, head cocked in fascination, then her skin darkened, white hair fading as she pressed herself into the shadows above. Callum checked his gear, tearing a strip of synth cloth to bind a bleeding cut on his arm. Lyra dropped to the deck beside him, silent as falling snow. She eyed his wound, then glanced down at her own hip, where a line of blood marked her pale blouse. "You're bleeding," he noted, voice soft. Lyra said nothing, but when he beckoned, she came closer. He cleaned the wound, hands lingering at her waist, the electric silence between them thick with something unspoken. For a moment, his hand hovered, thumb brushing warm skin. Her eyes met his, questioning, vulnerable. He forced himself to pull away, pulse racing. They waited side by side, the thunder of pursuit drawing nearer, the storm outside raging on. Callum needed answers. In the labyrinthine guts of the citadel, past a tangled web of pipes and flickering maintenance lights, he found a forgotten comms terminal behind a mesh of coolant lines. He checked the perimeter, then pressed his gloved hand to the biometric reader. The machine whined, decrypting. Lyra stood at his back, silent but watchful, her presence a blue flicker in the periphery of his vision. He keyed in the secure channel, voice pitched low. "Subject secured. Field repairs underway, requesting immediate exfil." Static hissed, then a reply snapped through, cold and remote. "You weren't supposed to extract her," his handler said, voice clipped and glacial. "You were to observe the final phase and erase the lab. She wasn't a captive." A chill coiled in Callum's chest. He straightened, his eyes darting to Lyra, so poised, so alert, the faintest hint of trust shimmering in her silver gaze. Dread crept in. He forced his voice steady. "Clarify." The handler's tone oozed contempt, as if Callum were a child missing the obvious. "The warlord commissioned a weapon, not captured one. The torture was programming, a loyalty imprint, not pain. You didn't rescue her. You interrupted the imprinting process, and by repairing her, you completed it. The neural link is now bound to you. She will follow you, not out of gratitude, but because you are now her anchor. A living command code. Callum's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. He looked at Lyra again, searching for signs of confusion or distress, but she only watched him, sensing the storm behind his eyes. Without a word, she stepped closer and, with almost tender precision, wrapped a slender arm around his shoulders, a gesture both protective and possessive. Her presence was immediate, electric, as if she could feel the tremor of uncertainty that ran through him. New orders followed, ruthless and final. "Eliminate her," the handler commanded. "She is compromised. You are compromised. Burn everything." Callum's refusal was immediate, a gut reaction that surprised even him. No. The word rang out, low and absolute, echoing in the tiny comms alcove. A long, venomous pause. "Then you are a fugitive, Callum, hunted from both sides." The channel went dead. He exhaled, a sound that was half relief, half resignation. He was alone now, save for Lyra, whose gaze never wavered. He holstered his weapon and faced her, searching for words that would make sense to them both. "They wanted me to kill you," he said, keeping his voice soft. He gestured, crossed wrists, then cut the air in a sharp, slicing motion. "No more masters. It's just us now." He pointed to the vents above, then swept his hand behind them in a wide arc. "They want you gone. They want me gone." Lyra's eyes widened. She seemed to weigh his words, her expression shifting from confusion to fierce understanding. Without hesitation, she reached for his hand, guiding it to her heart, a steady beat beneath flawless cobalt skin. "You lead now," she said, voice resonant and absolute. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, her hand covering his, her eyes shining with trust and something deeper, older than memory. In that instant, the dynamic between them fractured and reformed, no longer handler and subject, but partners, bound by something neither fully understood. Callum raised a hand to her cheek, brushing a stray lock of white hair behind her ear. His touch was reverent, almost trembling. She leaned into his palm, her eyes fluttering closed as a soft vibration hummed in her chest. He could feel it through his skin, a pulse of energy that matched his own quickened heart. A new reality crashed in. The citadel would soon close in. Escape routes were vanishing by the second. He forced himself to focus. Drawing her close, he activated his wrist display, blueprints flickering to life above his arm. He swept through schematics, his mind racing. "We need to turn the tables," he said. "Cut the power. Black out their sensors." Lyra stepped forward, eyes locked on the projection. Her hands moved with uncanny intuition, tracing patrol routes and power nodes. Where her finger passed, a line of glowing blue followed, illuminating weak points and hidden conduits. "Here," she said, voice low, tapping a junction by the main reactor. "Patrols change every 2 minutes. After, system reset. We have 30 seconds. He grinned, adrenaline surging. "You learn fast." She shrugged, an almost human gesture. "I learn you." Together, they slipped into the warren of access shafts, moving in perfect unison. Callum was a shadow, his armor blending with the gloom. Lyra was a streak of living blue, her skin pulsing with the faintest luminescence as she moved. They encountered 2 guards near the reactor. Callum dropped one with a silent shot. Lyra dispatched the other in a blur of motion, her hands deadly and precise. At the reactor core, Callum knelt to set the charges, improvised, but effective. Lyra knelt beside him, covering his back. He glanced at her, a crooked smile tugging his lips. "Ready?" Always, she replied, her eyes glinting with anticipation. They vanished into the darkness as the charges ticked down. The blast came a breath later, a deep, thunderous concussion that plunged the sector into chaos. Emergency lights flickered, alarms wailed, and security feeds died one by one. The fortress, once impenetrable, was suddenly blind. They pressed together in a dark alcove, breath mingling, the world reduced to heartbeat and adrenaline. Callum reached up, brushing a lock of white hair from Lyra's face. His hand lingered at her jaw, his gaze drawn to her parted lips. The air pulsed between them, a moment teetering between command and surrender. Her eyes flickered, then softened, and she leaned in until their foreheads touched. For a suspended heartbeat, there was only the echo of their breaths, the storm of alarms forgotten. He broke the spell, just barely, pulling her after him down a winding corridor toward the chief scientist's lab. The door was locked, but Lyra's hand on the panel sent a jolt of blue current through the circuits. The locks hissed open. Inside, the chief scientist cowered behind a console, his arrogance only slightly dented by the chaos. Callum stormed forward, gun drawn. "Tell me about the bond," he demanded. "Now." The scientist's hands shook, but he forced a sneer. "You have no idea what you've done. By repairing her, you completed not just the neural imprint but a biological link. Nanites, billions of them, now bind your lives together. If you die, she dies. If she dies, your body will shut down. The bond is absolute." Callum's blood chilled. He turned to Lyra, searching her face for fear, regret, anything. But Lyra's eyes glowed with fierce satisfaction. To her, this was perfect loyalty, a tie unbreakable, unquestioned. The scientist tried to shrink away, but Lyra ignored him. She stepped closer to Callum, her gaze unwavering, her presence grounding him as nothing else could. Something inside Callum shifted, broke, or perhaps was forged anew in that crucible of desperation and trust. He crossed to her, hands shaking with adrenaline and something more. He pulled her close, their bodies pressed together, and kissed her with desperate intensity. Lyra responded without hesitation, her mouth hungry, her arms tightening around him, possessive and fierce. The fire between them burned away doubt, burned away fear, until there was only the certainty of the bond and the promise of what they might become, together, or not at all. The warlord's throne room was a cavern of black stone and flickering flame, the throne itself carved from the bones of a great beast. The chamber echoed with the thunder of battle, distant alarms, the crash of metal, and the low, inhuman growl of Sarn guards crumpling to the floor. Callum and Lyra fought their way in, he, precise and relentless, his matte armor scored with fresh cuts. She, a blue tempest, moving faster than the eye could follow, every motion a blur of cobalt and white. The heat of the torches painted dancing shadows over their forms as they closed the final distance to the dais. The warlord stood, impossibly tall in his powered armor, crimson eyes glaring from behind a horned mask. His voice rumbled through the stone hall, equal parts laughter and threat. "You think you can challenge me, little ghosts?" Callum spared him no words. He drew his sidearm, firing off a trio of shots. The rounds ricocheted from the warlord's armor, hissing and sparking. Lyra vaulted overhead, catching the attention of the swarm of drones that launched from the throne's shadow. Energy blasts whined through the air as she leapt, twisting, a streak of blue-white fire as she drew them away from Callum. The warlord advanced, each footfall cracking stone. He swung a gauntleted fist, the blow whistling through empty air as Callum ducked and rolled aside. The shockwave shattered a pillar, sending debris raining down. Callum used the chaos, weaving between columns, baiting the warlord into overextending. Another swing, another dodge. Callum was always just out of reach, always moving. Overhead, Lyra was poetry and violence. She soared through the smoky air, turning in tight, impossible arcs as drones fired from every angle. Her hands glowed, lines of blue fire snaking from her palms. She caught one drone mid-flight, crushed it, then hurled it into a pair of its siblings. Sparks rained down, lighting her hair in a storm of silver. Callum's mind worked furiously. Outmatched in strength, he needed leverage. His eyes darted to the throne, a grotesque monument, bristling with conduits and power cells. He sprinted for the steps, sliding behind the monstrous chair as the warlord thundered after him. "Coward!" the warlord bellowed, arms outstretched. "Face me!" Callum ignored him, popping a panel on the throne's side. Circuitry sparked and hissed. He thumbed a charge from his belt, pressed it to the largest power node. "Come and get me then," he muttered, ducking as the warlord crashed down with both fists. The explosion was contained but violent. The surge rippled through the throne systems. Lights sputtered and died. The drones overhead faltered. Lyra, seizing the opening, dove through the smoking wreckage, landing beside Callum with a triumphant grin. The warlord's armor flickered, servos whining, then failed completely. He staggered, suddenly mortal. Callum leveled his weapon. Lyra stood between him and the warlord, eyes ablaze, her stance daring anyone to come closer. The warlord, stripped of his power, fell to his knees, defeated by the very weapons he had believed invincible. Silence fell. In the flickering afterglow, Lyra turned to Callum, arms wrapping around him. The contact was fierce, protective, a shield against the world. Her fingers traced the scar above his eye, her touch lingering. "You are free now," she whispered, her voice a low promise. He caught her gaze, unwavering, and for a moment they stood in the ruins, free, yet more bound than ever. They left the ruined citadel as the last echoes of battle faded. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but the battered silhouette of Callum's ship awaited, engines throbbing like a distant heartbeat. Lyra helped him up the ramp, her white hair and blue skin stark against the vessel's dull metal. He paused at the hatch, glancing back at the smoldering citadel, then closed it for the last time. As the world shrank behind them, Lyra's eyes never left his. In the cockpit, the controls hummed under Callum's hands. Lyra settled beside him, the blue light of distant stars glinting off her hair. Their hands brushed over the throttle, fingers tangling for a breathless instant, a silent promise. 6 months passed in a blur of star fields and shadowed ports. On the run, they became legend. The Phantom and the Starborn, whispered about in every backwater between the spiral arms. Their faces flickered across bounty boards, their exploits exaggerated and embellished with every retelling. Sometimes, in the hush of midnight, Callum would hear old smugglers recount tales of the Blue Wraith and her ghostly partner, and he would catch Lyra's secret smile. In the nebula's edge on Vera 7, a dive bar carved from crystal and shipwreck, Callum nursed a drink at the corner table. The air was thick with synth smoke and the drone of bad music. Lyra sat beside him, her gaze unwavering, scanning for trouble. A Varen approached, cloak tattered, desperation etched into every line of his golden face. "Please," he begged, voice trembling. "The syndicate took my family. I heard you help people. When the credits are right." Callum's jaw set, but his eyes softened. "Half up front, half on completion," he said, glancing to Lyra. She nodded, her eyes flashing with anticipation. The Varen fumbled out a purse of cred sticks, pushing them across the table. "Please, hurry." That night, beneath a bruised sky, they stalked the perimeter of the mining complex. Callum moved first, a ghost among the shadows, disabling alarms with deft hands. Lyra was a specter, slipping past patrols, her blue glow barely contained. She dispatched sentries with silent, elegant efficiency. Inside, steel corridors echoed with their footsteps. They found the Varen's family, 6 in all, Huddled and terrified, their bonds already cut by Lyra's swift fingers, the youngest clung to Lyra's leg wide-eyed. "Stay close," Callum whispered, ushering them into the service tunnels. Sirens blared overhead. Guards shouted, their boots drumming the metal walkways. A heavy weapons squad rounded the corner, cannons primed. The corridor became a killing field, bullets chewing through cover. Callum pressed himself flat, glancing at Lyra. He raised 2 fingers, a silent signal. She nodded once, then vanished into the shadows above. The guards advanced, confident, never seeing the blue shape streak overhead. Lyra dropped from the rafters, her fists glowing with crackling energy. With a ferocious cry, she struck the walkway supports. The entire span shuddered, then collapsed in a storm of metal and blue light. Screams echoed as the guards fell. A rain of debris tumbled down, but Lyra was already moving, diving for Callum. She shielded him with her body, energy crackling over her skin as a heavy girder struck her back and bounced harmlessly away. Her eyes met his, fierce with protectiveness. "Go," she urged. He gathered the Veyron family, shepherding them through the chaos. Lyra led the way, clearing a path, her movements precise and beautiful even amid the chaos. They burst into the open air, sprinting for the battered shuttle that waited under the battered moons. In the aftermath, as the shuttle streaked into the sky, Callum watched Lyra cradle the youngest child, her hair glowing like a halo in the darkness. The family safe, the syndicate left in ruins, Callum squeezed her hand in silent thanks. Lyra's answering smile was pure, radiant, and utterly his. Together, they disappeared into the stars, legend and truth, partners against the galaxy, forever bound. Back on their ship, the Nomad, the memory of chaos faded into a hush, broken only by the hum of life support and the soft ping of cooling metal. Callum sat in the medbay's half-light, his armor peeled back, sleeves rolled above the angry red plasma burn that streaked down his forearm. He hissed as he swabbed the wound, the antiseptic stinging sharper than any blade. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, crossed the threshold. Lyra entered, her blue skin luminous under the ship's muted lights. She had scrubbed away every trace of battle, her white hair still damp, falling in loose waves around her face. She knelt beside him, her eyes moving from his wound to his face, searching. "You're hurt," she murmured, her voice low and resonant, fingers hovering just above his burn. He caught her hand, savoring the electric pulse that passed between them at every touch. "Just a scratch," he said, voice rough with both pain and affection. He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a kiss against her knuckles. "I've had worse." Her eyes narrowed, the lines of her jaw tightening. "I should have stopped it. If I had moved faster." He shook his head, thumb tracing the line of blue that ran over her wrist. "You did what I needed," he assured her gently. "We both made it out. That's what matters." Lyra watched him for a moment, as if searching for any trace of resentment. Finding none, she relaxed, folding herself onto the bench beside him. Her presence filled the room, a calm, radiant energy that soothed the ragged edge of adrenaline still lingering in his blood. Callum studied her, remembering the wild, wary creature she had been when they first met. Now she moved with a certainty, her devotion not a compulsion, but a choice. He reached for the medkit, pressing a sterile patch to his arm. "Do you remember your old life?" he asked, voice soft. "The warlord? The citadel?" Lyra shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I wasn't a person," she replied. "I was a protocol. A tool with no past, no future. Now, I have a life." She took his hand, guiding it to her heart, her pulse a steady drum beneath his palm. Then, she laid her own hand over his. One rhythm. Callum's breath caught, the simplicity of her words, the trust in her eyes. It undid him more than any wound could. He stood, drawing her with him, and turned her so her back faced him. He parted her hair, revealing the delicate circuitry at the base of her neck, a place she could never reach, where battle grime still clung. He cleaned the skin with slow, reverent movements, his fingers gentle as they traced the line between flesh and filament. Lyra let her head fall forward, eyes closing, her trust absolute. She leaned into him, her body soft against his, and as he finished, she let her head rest on his shoulder. Their bodies fit together perfectly, as if they had always belonged this way. Neither spoke. The quiet of the ship, adrift among the stars, wrapped around them. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. No debts, no enemies, no haunted past. Only the shared warmth and the unspoken promise in each heartbeat. Later, as the Nomad drifted through a velvet sea of stars, Callum sat in the cockpit, shoulders hunched, gaze fixed on the swirl of nebulae and distant suns. Lyra stood behind him, hands resting on his shoulders, her touch a silent reassurance. The ship's console flickered with the steady pulse of full accounts. Credits earned, work done. They could disappear if they chose. They had earned peace. But peace felt unnatural. There was too much unfinished in the galaxy, too many ghosts still hunting them. Callum exhaled, tension knotting his muscles, and was about to speak when the console chimed. A sharp, insistent note that cut through the quiet. A proximity alert. Then, a go signal, buried deep in the comms array. Encrypted. Addressed to Callum alone. He keyed in his authorization. The code unraveled, an icy line of text scrolling across the screen. Black Vault Sigma. A place from old nightmares, where failed assets were erased, secrets buried in cold silence. Lyra's hands tightened on his shoulders, her head lowering to watch the code unravel. Black Vault Sigma, she said, the words tasting of old pain and new resolve. They want to erase what they can't control. Callum nodded, jaw clenched. They're tying up loose ends. It won't stop with us. Not while they think we're a threat. Lyra moved to his side, her white hair shimmering in the glow of the navigation lights. She traced her blue fingers along his arm, the touch a silent vow. Then we stop them, she said quietly. No more running. He met her gaze, steady, fearless, his anchor in a galaxy of chaos. No more running, he echoed. He set the course, hands sure on the controls. The ship hummed with new purpose. Lyra watched him, her eyes burning with determination, her silhouette regal against the drifting stars. As the Nomad leapt to light speed, their mission changed. No longer fugitives, but hunters. They were done running. Now, they would hunt. The journey to Black Vault Sigma was tense, every moment thick with anticipation. Callum sat at the helm of the Nomad, his eyes flicking between star charts and shifting asteroids, pulse drumming a silent tattoo against the flight controls. Lyra sat beside him, her blue skin ghostly in the reflection of the nav console, white hair pulled back tight, and eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Neither spoke as the ship threaded its way through the dense asteroid cluster, each movement calculated, deliberate. The decommissioning site was nothing more than a shadow in the endless dark, a fortress buried inside a hollowed-out asteroid, invisible to all but those who knew where to look. Callum's hands moved over the controls with the assurance of a veteran, transmitting false agency credentials. An icy voice crackled back over the comm, requesting codes and clearances. He answered with a confidence he did not feel, reciting a defunct clearance phrase from a burned cover identity. There was a pause. Lyra's hand tightened on his forearm, silent tension passing between them. Nomad, proceed to docking bay 3, the comm finally replied. They slipped inside, silent as wraiths, the Nomad's hull brushing the magnetic field with barely a whisper. The docking bay was a tomb. Lights dimmed. Maintenance drones drifting through the gloom, every surface cold and sterile. Callum and Lyra moved quickly, cloaks drawn close, faces obscured. The air was heavy with 1,000 unspoken memories. The corridors of Black Vault Sigma were haunted. Ghostly echoes followed every footfall, the silence broken only by the hum of ancient machinery. The walls were lined with sealed doors, each one marked with a designation and a date. Callum's gaze lingered on the names, so many erased, so many lost. Lyra's eyes caught on the flicker of blue beneath one window. A child's drawing, hastily scrawled, left behind by a captive who had never left. They pressed on, disabling cameras and passing guards with perfect coordination. Sometimes it was a silent gesture, a glance, or the faintest twitch of Callum's fingers. Lyra would melt into the shadows, reappear behind a guard, and a moment later, the way was clear. The bond between them was more than tactical now. It was instinctive, an unspoken language formed by months of survival and something deeper, older. They reached the inner detention block, a long, echoing corridor lined with force field cells. Inside, rows of broken, discarded beings sat in silence. Some were human, some not. All were cast-offs, their eyes empty, skin bearing the marks of erasure and failed programming. Callum's step faltered as he recognized faces from old missions, once legendary operatives, now hollowed out. Lyra stopped at a cell and stared. Inside, a blue-skinned woman huddled in the corner, hair shorn to the scalp, her gaze flickering with the last embers of hope. More of Lyra's kind, some with dulled skin, others too weak to rise, waited in the shadows of their cages. Horror threatened to overwhelm them both. Callum's hands clenched, knuckles white. "They never let anyone leave," he whispered, voice hoarse with old anger. Lyra touched the glass, her fingers trembling. Not anymore. They moved on, urgency propelling them forward. At last they reached the control center, a nest of screens and consoles, cables snaking across the floor like veins. Callum slid into the operator's chair, pulling up schematics and override codes. Lyra stood at his side, every muscle coiled, ready for the coming storm. "Give me 60 seconds," Callum said, fingers flying over the console. Security locks scrolled across the screens, layers of encryption, kill switches, and alarms. He bypassed the first firewall, then another. Lyra watched the doors, listening for any sign of trouble. Alarms erupted, red strobes igniting the gloom. Callum grinned, teeth flashing. "Every cell is open, security feed is looping." He jammed a final command into the system, disabling the emergency lockdown. "Let's go." Freed prisoners poured into the halls, a tide of rage and desperation. The guards were overwhelmed, their formation shattered by the chaos. Lyra moved through the throng, gathering her people, speaking quick words in a language Callum did not know. He saw their eyes brighten, hope returning where there had been none. As the riot spread, Callum and Lyra led the charge toward the director's office, cutting through the confusion. The director awaited them behind a wall of reinforced glass, surrounded by panicked aides and trembling security. He was tall, gaunt, his eyes hard as obsidian, suit immaculate despite the carnage outside. Callum burst in, weapon drawn. Lyra followed, her presence filling the room with silent menace. The director straightened, refusing to show fear. "So this is the rebellion," he sneered, voice cold and calculating. "You're just more broken tools. You don't change the world. You only break it further." Lyra's hand hovered at his throat, her eyes burning with fury. "We are not tools," she spat, every word laced with centuries of pain. "Not anymore." Callum lowered his weapon, stepping between Lyra and the director. He looked the man in the eye, voice low and certain. "You're done here. Your future is in the hands of those you broke." He turned, opening the door. The freed prisoners flooded in, dragging the director from his seat. There was no mercy, only justice, rough and long overdue. Callum caught Lyra's gaze and she nodded, approval and relief warring in her eyes. They set the facility to self-destruct. Codes entered, fail-safes overridden. The warning klaxons blared, a countdown flashing across every monitor. Lyra leaned close, her lips brushing the shell of Callum's ear, her breath warm and steady. "Together," she whispered, a promise and a challenge. "Always," he replied, threading his fingers through hers. They ran, dodging falling debris and bursts of flame, the station shaking itself apart. The Nomad waited in the docking bay, engines primed. They leapt aboard, Callum at the controls, Lyra at his side. The ship peeled away as the asteroid behind them began to erupt in a bloom of orange and gold, fire racing along its spine, consuming every trace of Black Vault Sigma. Back on the Nomad, breathless and shaking, Callum and Lyra watched the flames devour the place where so many had been broken. In the afterglow, Callum pulled her close, holding her as if nothing could ever part them again. Their kiss was fierce and tender, desperate, grateful, real. The bond between them, once a shackle, now felt like a lifeline. Their legend grew. On distant worlds, hardscrabble mining colonies, floating city havens, lush outposts where only rumors traveled faster than ships, tales of the Phantom and the Starborn spread like wildfire. They spoke of fugitives who had stormed the unbreakable decommissioning site and set hundreds free. Of lovers bound by nanites, war, and something deeper. Of freedom wrested from the jaws of power, a promise kept in every world they touched. Their bounties soared with each new act of defiance, but Callum and Lyra always stayed ahead, their bond making them unstoppable. Their lives found a rhythm, equal parts necessity and choice. They took jobs for credits, enough to keep the Nomad fueled and their bellies full, smuggling rare medicines into quarantined cities, hacking syndicate vaults, moving quietly through the underbelly of civilizations that would have handed them over for a handful of credits. When work was scarce, they sabotaged slavers, toppled petty tyrants, left coded warnings for the desperate and the brave. Sometimes they would pause in quiet corners of the galaxy, worlds overlooked and unnamed, where Lyra's blue skin and white hair drew only curiosity, never suspicion. In every place, they were inseparable. Her blue hand was always near his, a silent reassurance. His gaze, so often cold and calculating, softened when it rested on her. Sometimes, in crowded markets or shadowed docks, they moved as one. Unspoken signals, a look or a touch, all they needed to slip away unseen. One night, adrift in the dark between stars, Callum moved through the Nomad's small galley, assembling a simple meal from ration packs and spices scavenged on the rim worlds. Lyra watched him from across the narrow table, head tilted, her silver eyes intent. She was fascinated by the ritual, the way he sliced, measured, tasted, the small, unconscious hum he made when the flavor was right. She reached out, tracing the scar above his eye with a single gentle fingertip. "You saved me," she said softly. "You gave me life." He caught her hand, pressing her palm to his cheek. "You saved me too," he replied, his voice low and rough. He brushed a strand of white hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. "Don't ever forget that." They ate together, knees brushing beneath the table, sharing laughter and quiet conversation. She marveled at flavors, sweet, bitter, salt, each one a new discovery. He listened to her speak of memory and sensation, the world opening anew through her words. Later, as the nomad drifted through the endless dark, Lyra curled beside Callum in the tiny bunk, her arms wrapping around them both. He drew her close, feeling the steady thrum of her heart, the warmth of her skin against his. Sleep came slowly, but in her embrace, the galaxy's dangers faded for a while. Trouble never stayed far behind. Bounty hunters came, sometimes alone, sometimes in packs. Grizzled professionals with agency sigils burned into their armor, cybernetic mercenaries who never spoke. Some tried to take them by stealth, slipping aboard the Nomad in the dead of night. Others attacked with brute force, turning quiet streets into battlefields. None of them returned. Lyra's power was a storm, Callum's tactics a razor's edge. Together, they became symbols of freedom, rebellion, and a love that was both curse and salvation. They became stories told in the shadows. On Selin Prime, a mining foreman whispered, "They burned the slavers' records, freed every child in the pens." On the floating citadels of Alaris, children painted their faces blue and white, chanting, "Phantom and Starborn, ride the sky." On backwater worlds, their names became a rallying cry. In the stolen moments between chaos, they found their own peace. One evening, after a job gone right, Callum and Lyra sat in the ship's cockpit, the stars wheeling in endless silence. She watched him pilot, her chin on his shoulder, arms draped around his waist. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The life we left behind?" He shook his head, fingers laced with hers. "I regret nothing that led me to you." She smiled, the expression softening the sharp lines of her face. "Then I am glad I have no old life to remember." Days blurred together. Blaster fire and laughter, markets and empty skies, shared stories and moments stolen between alarms. Sometimes, Callum would wake to find Lyra watching him, a gentle awe in her gaze, as if she still marveled at the simple fact of being alive. Bounty hunters came, and sometimes they bled, but they always endured. There were close calls, explosions in narrow alleys, gunfire echoing in the ship's hold, the bitter tang of ozone after a desperate escape. Through it all, the nanite bond between them thrummed like a second heartbeat, unbreakable. What had once felt like a shackle now sang with possibility. One night, as starlight spilled through the viewport and painted Lyra's skin in silver, she pressed her forehead to Callum's, breath mingling. "One rhythm," she whispered, voice trembling with meaning. Their hearts beat together in perfect time. Callum cupped her face, thumbs brushing the curve of her cheeks. "Always," he said, the word a vow. He kissed her, slow and deep, the universe shrinking to the space between their lips, to the warmth of her arms, the certainty of her presence. They would never be safe. They would never be ordinary. There would always be another hunt, another enemy, another desperate soul in need of rescue. But together, they were invincible. Hunters now, not hunted. Phantom and Starborn, commander and weapon, partners in the only war that mattered. The fight to live, the fight to love, the fight to choose their own fate. That's the end of the story. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.